Minutes after the judge finalized my divorce, I stood in the courthouse parking lot and made the phone call I had been waiting 5 long years to make. I told my father to fire all 28 employees my mother-in-law had secretly planted in our family business. Thank God I made that call, because less than an hour later, my former mother-in-law and her entitled family kicked down my front door, demanding I beg for their forgiveness. They had no idea they were walking straight into a trap I had carefully laid for them. I am Maya, 33 years old, and my divorce did not just end a toxic marriage, it triggered the financial ruin of the people who thought they could drain my family dry. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you love seeing greedy people get exactly what they deserve. The heavy wooden gavel struck the sound block with a sharp crack. The judge declared my marriage to Julian officially over. I did not shed a single tear. Julian stood up, adjusting the lapels of a suit he bought using my credit card, and smirked at me. He turned and walked out of the courtroom, wrapping his arm around the waist of his pregnant mistress, who had been waiting in the gallery. For 5 years, Julian had treated me like a useless, low-earning freelancer who was lucky to have a man like him. He believed I spent my days in my sweatpants doing basic bookkeeping for small clients while he played the big-shot businessman. He never knew my actual profession, and he certainly never knew I was the majority shareholder of the very company his family was quietly bleeding dry. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, climbed into my modest sedan, and pulled out my phone. I dialed my father, David. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with anticipation. "Dad, it is done," I said, starting the engine. "The divorce decree is signed. Initiate the purge. Terminate all 28 of Brenda's planted employees immediately. Lock them out of the corporate network and revoke their building access." My father let out a heavy sigh of relief through the receiver. "I have been playing the defeated, clueless CEO for so long, Maya," he said. "Watching Brenda and Marcus parade around the office like they owned the place has been torture." I smiled, navigating my car out of the parking lot. "I know, Dad. But playing the docile daughter was the only way." If Julian or Brenda knew I was actually a senior forensic accountant, or that grandfather left 51% of the company in a blind trust under my name, Julian's divorce lawyers would have dragged us through a decade of financial discovery. By acting like a passive freelancer, I kept my shares completely off his radar. Now that the marital assets are legally severed, we can finally crush them. Send the termination emails right now. I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of half a decade of manipulation lift from my shoulders. I pulled into the driveway of my house, a property my grandfather left me long before I met Julian. Before I could even turn off the ignition, 3 luxury cars screeched to a halt right behind me, blocking my sedan. A brand new Mercedes, a Range Rover, and a sleek Porsche Macan. Out stormed my former mother-in-law Brenda, her daughter Vanessa, and Vanessa's husband Marcus. Brenda marched up the driveway, holding a thick stack of printed emails, her face red with absolute fury. "You vindictive little witch," Brenda screamed, waving the papers in my face as I stepped out of my car. "You think because Julian dumped you, you can run crying to your daddy and cut off our family's livelihood?" Marcus stepped forward, towering over me with the arrogant posture he always carried. "I am the sales director of that company, Maya." He pointed a finger inches from my face. "I bring in millions for your father. You think a work from home nobody like you can authorize my firing without me? Your father's business goes bankrupt in a month." Vanessa laughed mockingly, leaning against her Porsche. She looked me up and down, sneering at my simple blazer and jeans. "Look at you, Maya. You live in this basic house and barely make minimum wage. We drive luxury cars and wear designer clothes because we actually know how to make money. Do not take your bitter divorce out on us just because you are a failed freelancer." I did not argue with their delusions. I simply brought 2 of my fingers to my lips and gave a sharp whistle. The front door of my house opened, and 2 armed private security contractors I had hired that morning stepped out onto the porch, resting their hands near their tactical belts. Brenda and Vanessa took a quick step back. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and tossed it so it fluttered down to land right on Brenda's designer shoes. "That is your severance pay," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "Now get off my premarital property before I have you arrested for trespassing." Vanessa's shock quickly morphed into a malicious grin as she pulled out her phone. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Prepare for a $15 million class action lawsuit, sweetheart. Marcus has all the files proving your father's company is guilty of racial discrimination and tax evasion. You are going to lose everything." They turned and marched back to their luxury cars, entirely convinced they had just backed me into a corner. As they sped away, I smiled. A $15 million lawsuit was exactly what I needed them to file. I stood there and watched them disappear down the long, quiet street. Vanessa's Porsche faded around the corner. I locked my front door and walked straight to my home office. The house was dead quiet, but my mind was racing. I booted up my workstation. 6 monitors hummed to life, casting a blue glow across the room. Brenda and Marcus thought they had the upper hand. They had no idea I had spent 5 years documenting every fraudulent wire transfer they made. My phone buzzed sharply on the desk early the next morning. My father's name flashed on the screen. I answered, and his panicked voice filled the room. "Maya, they actually did it. A process server just walked into the lobby. We are being sued for $15 million. Send me the digital scan immediately, Dad. Play the part perfectly. Act terrified in front of the remaining staff. Let Brenda's spies in the accounting department think you are having a complete mental breakdown." A minute later, the legal document hit my inbox. Marcus had hired a ruthless litigator to file a class action claim for wrongful termination and discrimination. The plaintiff list included all 28 of the employees I had fired yesterday. I scrolled through the names and scoffed. It was insulting how sloppy they were. I opened my encrypted database and cross-referenced the names with the company payroll. Brenda had planted these people, claiming they were essential remote consultants. I pulled up the first name on the plaintiff list, Sarah Jenkins. I ran her social security number through my federal database access. Sarah Jenkins had died 2 years ago in a car accident. Brenda had been collecting her salary ever since. I clicked the next name, David Miller. A quick search revealed David was currently serving a 10-year sentence in a maximum security prison for armed robbery. I went down the list. 14 dead people. 10 of Brenda's country club friends who already had full-time jobs in other states. The remaining 4 plaintiffs were registered to 4 golden retrievers Vanessa owned. They were literally suing my father for $15 million on behalf of dead people and dogs. I compiled the evidence into a secure folder labeled Ghost Protocol. They had just handed me the exact weapon I needed. By knowingly submitting these forged payroll records to a federal court, they had crossed the line from corporate embezzlement to federal wire fraud and perjury. The trap was perfectly set. Before I could call my father back, the heavy thud of someone pounding on my front door echoed through the hallway. I checked the security cameras. It was Julian. My ex-husband stood on my porch wearing a smug grin, accompanied by a man in a sharp gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. Julian's divorce attorney. I signaled the security guards to stand down and open the door. Julian pushed past me without an invitation, acting like he still owned the place. His lawyer followed closely behind, surveying my modest living room with clear disdain. "You should have listened to my mother, Maya," Julian sneered, turning to face me. "Now your dad's company is going down in flames. Marcus is going to bleed him dry in court." I kept my expression perfectly terrified, playing the helpless victim he always believed I was. "What do you want, Julian? The divorce is finalized. You got your freedom." "Freedom is not cheap, sweetheart," Julian laughed, pulling a fresh court petition from his lawyer's briefcase and slamming it onto my kitchen counter. "I am filing for emergency spousal support, $10,000 a month. Since you wasted your 20s playing around as a failed freelancer, while I brought home the real money, I am entitled to maintain the lifestyle I became accustomed to." I stared at the document. "You want alimony. You are the one who cheated on me and moved in with your pregnant mistress." His lawyer stepped forward with a cold, predatory smile. "Fault does not matter in this state, Ms. Maya. My client has significant debts incurred during your marriage, debts you are legally obligated to help resolve. Furthermore, given the impending $15 million judgment against your father's company, any future inheritance you might receive is effectively worthless. We suggest you sign this agreement to liquidate your personal savings to cover my client's immediate needs. I looked at Julian. Debts. What debts? Julian rolled his eyes. Do not play dumb. You know how expensive it is to maintain a certain standard of living. I had to take out massive cash advances to keep up appearances. I knew exactly what he was talking about. Julian had racked up hundreds of thousands in credit card debt buying designer jewelry and luxury vacations for his mistress, fully expecting my father's wealth to bail him out eventually. Sign the paper, Maya, Julian demanded, tapping his finger on the counter. If you fight this, I will gladly step up as a star witness for Marcus in his discrimination lawsuit against your dad. I will testify that your father creates a hostile work environment. I will make sure he loses everything. I let my hands tremble slightly. I looked down at the floor, forcing my voice to shake. Okay, I will not fight you, but I do not have the authority to make these financial decisions alone. We need to settle everything formally. Julian's eyes lit up with greedy triumph. Finally using your brain. I will host a formal mediation tomorrow morning at my father's corporate headquarters, I said, looking up at him with wide, defeated eyes. Bring your lawyer. Tell Brenda, Vanessa, and Marcus to be there too. We will settle the lawsuit and your alimony all at once. I will have my father draft the asset transfer papers. Julian snatched the petition off the counter, grinning like a victor. See you tomorrow, Maya. Do not be late to your own funeral. He turned and walked out the door, his lawyer trailing behind him like an obedient shadow. I watched his car pull away from the curb. The moment they were out of sight, the fake terror vanished from my face. My hands stopped trembling. I walked back to my workstation and locked the front door. Bait taken, I whispered to the empty room. They were so blinded by their own arrogance they could not see the cliff edge rapidly approaching. I sat down at my monitors and opened a secure communication channel to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, White Collar Crime Division. It was time to invite some very special guests to tomorrow's mediation. I stared at the thick legal document he shoved across my counter. $10,000 a month. The sheer audacity of his demand was staggering. I looked past Julian to his attorney, who was busy adjusting his expensive silk tie with an air of absolute superiority. The lawyer cleared his throat and leaned forward, resting his hands on his briefcase. My client has incurred substantial high-interest liabilities over the past 14 months, Miss Maya. The lawyer stated, his tone completely devoid of any professional tact. Maintaining a secondary residence and funding premium medical care for his new growing family required significant capital. He leveraged his credit based on the reasonable expectation that your grandfather's trust would eventually be liquidated to cover marital debts. I had to force myself not to laugh right in their faces. The arrogant fool in the gray suit had just handed me a golden confession. He just admitted out loud that Julian had intentionally racked up massive credit card debt to pay for his pregnant mistress's luxury condo and prenatal care. Julian had been swiping platinum cards for over a year, fully banking on stealing my inheritance to pay off the bills. They thought I was just a naive bookkeeping freelancer who would blindly write a check to avoid a scandal. I knew exactly how to play this. I let my shoulders slump forward perfectly, mimicking the defeated posture I had practiced for the last 5 years. I forced my breathing to become shallow and rapid. I raised my hands to my face, making sure they trembled violently enough for both men to notice. You cannot do this, Julian, I whispered, letting my voice crack with manufactured panic. If you testify for Marcus, my father will lose everything. He built that company from the ground up. You know he cannot survive a $15 million federal judgment. Please, Julian. Julian crossed his arms over his chest, basking in my fake misery. He looked down at me like I was an insect he was deciding whether or not to crush. Then sign the paperwork, Maya. Empty your little freelance savings account and transfer the deed to this house. Do it right now, and maybe I will tell Marcus to go easy on your old man. I shook my head slowly, keeping my eyes glued to the granite countertop. I cannot sign this here, I whimpered, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. The trust fund requires my father's authorization for any major liquidation. If you want your money and if Marcus wants his settlement, we have to do this formally. Julian scoffed, rolling his eyes at his lawyer. Always hiding behind your daddy. Pathetic. I forced myself to look up at him, maintaining my terrified expression. Bring your lawyer to my father's corporate headquarters tomorrow morning at 9 sharp. I said, my voice barely a squeak. Tell Brenda, Vanessa, and Marcus to be there too. We will host a formal mediation in the main boardroom. I will have my father draft the asset transfer papers. We will surrender. We will settle your alimony and Marcus's class action lawsuit all at once. Just please do not destroy my family. Julian's eyes lit up with unadulterated greed. He exchanged a quick, triumphant look with his attorney. He snatched the alimony petition off the counter and shoved it back into the leather briefcase. See you tomorrow morning, Maya, he sneered, turning toward the front door. Do not be late to your own funeral. He marched out of my house, his lawyer trailing behind him like an obedient lapdog. I watched through the front window as they climbed into Julian's leased luxury sedan and sped away down the quiet suburban street. The heavy wooden front door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid into place with a sharp metallic thud. Instantly, my trembling stopped. My slumped shoulders straightened. The terrified victim persona vanished completely, replaced by the cold, calculating forensic accountant I truly was. I walked into my home office and booted up my encrypted multi-monitor workstation. The screens hummed to life, casting a harsh blue light across my face. Hook, line, and sinker, I whispered to the empty room. They were walking directly into a federal trap, and they were entirely too arrogant to see the jaws closing around them. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and immediately opened a secure encrypted communication channel to the Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crime Division. I had been cultivating a working relationship with a senior special agent named Vance for the past 6 months, quietly feeding him anonymous tips about Brenda's offshore shell accounts. Today, I was finally removing my anonymity. I uploaded the Ghost Protocol folder directly to Agent Vance's secure server. The file contained every piece of damning evidence I had meticulously gathered over 5 years. It included the forged payroll documents listing dead people and dogs as active employees. It included the offshore wire transfers proving Brenda was funneling millions into private accounts. And now it included Marcus's freshly filed lawsuit, a document that proved he was knowingly committing federal wire fraud and felony perjury by suing my father on behalf of fictional workers. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was my father calling back for an update. I answered, putting him on speakerphone while my fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. Dad, it is done, I said, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. They took the bait. Julian, Brenda, Marcus, and Vanessa will all be in the main executive boardroom tomorrow morning at 9. They think we are surrendering. They think we are signing over the company and my trust fund to save ourselves. My father let out a low rumble of a laugh. His panic from earlier had completely evaporated now that he knew the trap was set. I will have the legal team prepare the fake settlement documents to keep them distracted, he said. The boardroom will be ready. I need you to clear the entire executive floor, Dad, I instructed, pulling up the architectural blueprints of the headquarters on my secondary monitor. Send all non-essential staff home for the day. I want the hallways completely empty when they arrive. Give them a false sense of security. Let them walk into that boardroom thinking they own the building. Consider it done, Maya, my father replied. Are you bringing your special guests? Agent Vance just confirmed receipt of the files. I smiled, watching the upload progress bar hit 100%. He is securing the federal warrants right now. He will be waiting in the adjoining conference room with a team of federal agents. The rest of the night passed in a blur of hyper-focused preparation. I printed physical copies of every single fraudulent transaction Brenda and Marcus had ever authorized. I arranged them into neat, glossy binders, one for each member of their parasitic family. I wanted them to see exactly how thoroughly I had dismantled their lies. I wanted them to hold the physical proof of their impending prison sentences in their own greedy hands. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry red, I finally powered down my workstation. I showered and dressed with meticulous care. I bypassed my usual simple jeans and oversized sweaters. Today required armor. I selected a tailored charcoal gray suit with a crisp white silk blouse and black stiletto heels. I pulled my hair back into a severe knot. I looked exactly like the senior corporate executive I was born to be. I grabbed the stack of evidence binders and walked out to my car. The morning air was crisp and biting. I drove toward the corporate headquarters, feeling a profound sense of calm wash over me. For 5 years, I had played the docile, quiet freelancer. I had swallowed their insults, their mockery, and their blatant disrespect. I had watched them drain my father's legacy while treating me like dirt on their expensive shoes. But today, the performance was over. Today, the quiet freelancer died, and the majority shareholder was taking her company back. I pulled into my reserved executive parking spot and stared up at the towering glass building. The final act was about to begin. I swiped my security badge across the reader of the private executive elevator. The heavy steel doors slid open to reveal a completely deserted floor. My father had followed my instructions flawlessly. The usual hum of ringing phones and chattering assistants was entirely absent. I walked straight past the main boardroom and headed directly for the restricted corporate server room. I locked the reinforced door behind me, sat down at the master console, and immediately began preparing the kill shot. Julian had spent half a decade convinced I was a low-level bookkeeper, desperately trying to scrape together pennies from local bakeries and landscaping startups. He simply never possessed the mental capacity to comprehend what a senior forensic accountant actually does. I do not just balance ledgers and file quarterly tax returns. I hunt phantoms. I track offshore accounts, dismantle complex shell companies, and trace laundered money across international borders for a living. I unravel financial crimes that entire teams of corporate lawyers fail to see. My supposed freelance gigs were actually high-clearance federal contract jobs. Julian's staggering ignorance had been my greatest shield. I logged into the encrypted corporate mainframe and opened a secure communication terminal. I pinged Agent Vance at the Federal Bureau of Investigation and immediately added a specialized contact from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division to the encrypted chat. They needed the final undeniable pieces of the puzzle before the 9 o'clock mediation began. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard as I compiled the ultimate digital dossiers. I needed to hand the federal agents a fully wrapped package of undeniable guilt. I pulled up the state registration documents for 4 specific corporate vendors incorporated in the state of Delaware: Apex Logistics, Summit Supply Solutions, Vanguard Consulting, and Horizon Management Group. To a standard internal auditor, these entities looked like perfectly legitimate third-party contractors, providing essential supply chain management. To my trained eye, they were a glaring neon sign of organized corporate fraud. I dragged the invoice histories for all 4 companies onto my center monitor. Marcus had personally established these fake entities to systematically siphon exactly $8.5 million out of our primary operating budget over the last 3 years. He had generated hundreds of fraudulent invoices charging my father's company for phantom shipping routes, imaginary warehouse expansions, and non-existent consulting hours. Brenda had used her high-level access to unilaterally approve the payments on our end. The cash would hit the Delaware bank accounts for exactly 48 hours before being quietly routed to a series of offshore holding trusts. They thought they were brilliant financial masterminds. In reality, they had left a digital paper trail so wide and deeply entrenched that a first-year accounting student could have flagged it. I bundled the routing numbers, the forged invoices, and the Delaware incorporation documents bearing Marcus's digital signature into a single encrypted file. I hit send, watching the data transfer directly to the IRS and the FBI. I had them dead to rights. They were going to walk into that boardroom today, expecting a massive payout, completely unaware that multiple federal agencies were actively building their prison cells. I reached for my coffee, feeling a deep sense of absolute victory. But then the screen in front of me flashed a blinding crimson red. A severe high-priority security alert blared through the silent server room. A custom tripwire protocol I had embedded deep within the corporate banking software months ago had suddenly been triggered. I maximized the alert window and felt the blood drain from my face. My heart slammed against my ribs. Marcus was not waiting for the mediation to get his money. He was making a final desperate play right now. I rapidly traced the source of the security breach. Someone using Marcus's executive credentials had bypassed the standard two-step verification process from an unrecognized IP address. They had successfully penetrated our emergency reserve account. I watched in real time as a massive withdrawal command was initiated. Marcus was attempting to empty the entire remaining liquid balance of the company, $12 million. He was trying to wire the entire sum directly to an untraceable numbered bank account in the Cayman Islands. I frantically typed override commands trying to cancel the transaction, but Brenda had used her master administrator privileges to lock out internal cancellations. They were initiating a total corporate bleed-out. I quickly analyzed the federal routing protocol. Because of the sheer massive size of the international wire transfer, the clearing bank had placed an automatic administrative hold on the funds. The money was currently suspended in a digital purgatory awaiting final federal clearance. I looked at the countdown timer flashing on the banking portal. I had exactly 12 hours to secure a federal freeze on all corporate assets before the administrative hold expired and the $12 million disappeared into the Caribbean forever. If that money crossed the international border, my father's company would instantly collapse into bankruptcy. We would not be able to make payroll tomorrow. The entire dynamic of the morning had just violently shifted. The mediation was scheduled to start in less than 20 minutes. The stakes were no longer just about exposing their fraud or protecting my personal inheritance. It was a race against a ticking clock. If I did not extract a full, uncoerced written confession from Marcus and Brenda in that boardroom today, Agent Vance and his IRS counterpart would not have the concrete probable cause needed to force a federal judge to execute an emergency asset freeze in time. I needed them to admit everything on the record. I needed them to gloat. I needed their arrogance to be their absolute undoing. I grabbed the stack of glossy evidence binders from the desk. My knuckles turned stark white as I gripped the heavy folders. I smoothed down the front of my charcoal suit, took one final calming breath, and unlocked the server room door. I marched down the long, silent hallway toward the main executive boardroom. The trap was set, but now I had to make sure the rats triggered the spring before the clock ran out. I swiped my master access card and bypassed the main lobby, entirely heading straight for the subterranean server farm. The clock on my secure terminal read 6 in the morning. I had exactly 3 hours before the mediation began, and Marcus's massive $12 million wire transfer was still hovering in the digital ether. If that money crossed the international border into the Cayman Islands, my father's company would be functionally bankrupt before the first cup of coffee was poured in the boardroom. I threw my suit jacket over a chair and cracked my knuckles. I could not simply smash the cancel button on the transaction. A hard rejection would immediately send a critical alert directly to Marcus's phone. He would panic, realize we were on to him, and he would never show up to the mediation. I needed a surgical strike. I needed to execute a digital lockdown that looked like sheer bad luck. I initiated a poison pill protocol. Instead of attacking the transfer from our corporate server, I routed my connection through a secure proxy to mirror the International Clearinghouse's automated compliance network. I injected a tiny string of code into the transaction metadata, manipulating the banking compliance tags. I intentionally scrambled the destination routing number by a single digit, triggering an automatic federal hold on the receiving end. I watched the progress bar inch forward. The system analyzed the altered data packet. A green light flashed across my screen. The trap snapped shut. The $12 million was instantly frozen, locked in an administrative holding account. On Marcus's executive dashboard, the status would simply display a routine banking error. Error code 404A. It was a standard 48-hour security delay. He would log in, see the delay, and assume it was just a slow processing day in the Caribbean. He would have absolutely no idea he was completely locked out of the system. With the corporate account secured, I shifted my focus back to the $8.5 million they had already successfully siphoned over the last 3 years. Agent Vance had the broad strokes, but I wanted to hand the FBI a map so precise they could trace the stolen money down to the exact penny. I opened my forensic tracking software and began dismantling the 4 Delaware shell companies Marcus and Brenda had created: Apex Logistics, Summit Supply Solutions, Vanguard Consulting, and Horizon Management Group. They had used a notoriously loose registered agent service to set up the LLCs, but they were remarkably sloppy with the actual disbursement of the funds. They operated under the assumption that nobody was watching. I followed the digital blood trail leaking out of Apex Logistics. Marcus was routing the cash through a series of crypto tumbling services, trying to wash the money clean. But Vanessa was entirely too greedy and far too stupid to manage untraceable funds. I locked onto a massive wire transfer routing directly from the Apex Shell account into Vanessa's personal private wealth management portfolio. The sheer volume of her spending was staggering. I pulled the property records for Pitkin County, Colorado. 3 months ago, Vanessa had purchased a sprawling 5-bedroom vacation chalet in Aspen. She paid $2.4 million entirely in cash. I downloaded the property deed and the title transfer documents matching the exact dollar amount to an invoice Brenda had approved for a fictional warehouse expansion. But Vanessa did not stop at real estate. I tracked a series of rapid-fire international wire transfers to a high-end boutique broker operating out of Paris. The amounts were incredibly specific: $150,000, $200,000. I used a backdoor exploit I had mapped out years ago to access the boutique's digital invoicing system. I pulled the encrypted receipts, and a cold smile stretched across my face. Vanessa had used stolen corporate funds to purchase 2 highly coveted Hermes Birkin bags. One was a rare matte crocodile finish, the other an exclusive ostrich leather. I downloaded the digital certificates of authenticity. I now possessed the exact unique serial numbers for both handbags. I cross-referenced those serial numbers with the precise timestamps of the embezzled corporate funds. The data matched flawlessly. I had successfully tied a pair of luxury purses directly to a multi-million-dollar corporate embezzlement scheme. Vanessa was walking around treating federal evidence like a fashion accessory. I compiled the final reports, printing the Aspen title deed and the Hermes receipts, and added them to Vanessa's glossy evidence binder. The physical weight of their crimes felt heavy in my hands. I locked the server room down, wiping my digital footprint completely clean. I took the private elevator up to the executive floor and walked into the main boardroom. The sprawling mahogany table gleamed under the recessed lighting. I placed the evidence binders in front of my chair and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the corporate plaza. The morning sun was just beginning to hit the pavement. It was exactly 8:45. A procession of 3 sleek black rented limousines turned off the main avenue and glided into the corporate parking lot. I watched from the glass tower as the drivers hurried to open the doors. They were arriving in a fleet of luxury cars, acting as if they were royalty descending upon their conquered territory. Julian stepped out of the first limousine. He wore a flashy custom-tailored suit, adjusting his cuffs with an air of absolute entitlement. He reached back inside and helped his pregnant mistress out of the car. She was draped in a designer trench coat clinging to Julian's arm, with a smug, triumphant sneer on her face. They were parading her around, throwing their infidelity directly in my face. Brenda emerged from the second car dripping in diamonds. She adjusted her sunglasses and looked up at the building, acting like the undisputed queen of an empire she had actively tried to bankrupt. Marcus stepped out next, aggressively barking orders into his cell phone. He looked tense, undoubtedly frustrated by the fake banking delay on his Cayman Islands transfer, but still completely oblivious to the federal trap waiting for him. Finally, Vanessa stepped out of the third limousine. I stared down at her and let out a sharp laugh. Resting perfectly in the crook of her arm was the exact matte crocodile Hermes Birkin bag I had just traced. She was literally carrying the evidence of her own felony conviction into a federal ambush. They grouped together in the parking lot, projecting a wall of unearned arrogance. They strutted toward the main glass entrance doors, ready to destroy my family and walk away filthy rich. I turned away from the window and took my seat at the head of the boardroom table. The heavy oak doors of the executive boardroom swung wide open. Julian led the procession, striding into the room with his chest puffed out like a conquering general. His pregnant mistress clung tightly to his arm, shooting me a look of pure, unadulterated triumph as they claimed two leather chairs near the center of the vast table. Vanessa followed closely behind. She casually placed her matte crocodile Hermes Birkin bag right in the middle of the polished mahogany surface, as if marking her territory with stolen funds. Brenda marched in next, exuding the kind of arrogant confidence that only comes from deep, absolute delusion. Marcus brought up the rear, checking his heavy gold watch and sighing loudly as if our mere presence was wasting his incredibly valuable time. My father, David, sat to my right. He was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance. He slumped in his executive chair with his head bowed, his shoulders curled inward, and his hands clasped tightly together on his lap. He looked exactly like a man who had entirely given up all hope. Marcus dropped heavily into the seat directly across from my father. He let out a loud groan of satisfaction, leaned back, and casually kicked his expensive Italian leather loafers right onto the pristine mahogany boardroom table. He crossed his ankles, knocking over a crystal water glass in the process, and smirked at us. "Get your feet off my table, Marcus." My father muttered, his voice deliberately shaking, lacking any of its usual booming authority. Marcus just laughed, picking lazily at his fingernails. "It is my table now, David. You just have not signed the final paperwork yet." Brenda dropped her expensive designer coat over the back of her chair and glared at me. "Maya, since you are just sitting there doing absolutely nothing useful, be a good girl and fetch me a coffee, black with 2 sugars, and be quick about it." I kept my expression perfectly blank. I let my shoulders droop, adopting the meek, subservient posture they all expected from me. I stood up without a single word of protest and walked over to the marble sideboard where the corporate catering staff had set up the morning coffee station. I poured the dark roast into a delicate porcelain cup, carefully tearing open 2 sugar packets. My hands moved with quiet precision, while my mind raced with the knowledge of the federal trap currently closing around them. While I stirred the hot coffee, Brenda leaned over the massive table and locked her predatory gaze on my father. "You should be thanking us, David." Brenda sneered, her voice echoing harshly in the cavernous room. "You were running this company straight into the ground. You have zero vision, zero modern corporate strategy, and zero understanding of how the real world actually operates. I am the one who built this place up to its current valuation. I am the one who modernized your archaic, outdated operations." I carried the coffee cup back to the table and set it gently in front of Brenda. I returned to my seat, folding my hands submissively in my lap. I brought in diverse remote talent. Brenda continued waving her hand dismissively at my father before taking a loud sip of her coffee. I sourced 28 essential regional directors and independent logistics consultants. I single-handedly built an entire network of high-level executives who actually know how to generate revenue in a modern market. I saved your failing business, David. If it was not for me sourcing those brilliant minds, this whole company would have gone bankrupt 3 years ago. You are a completely incompetent CEO who got lucky, and I stepped in to fix your mess." I looked down at my lap, biting the inside of my cheek hard to keep from smiling. Her brilliant, diverse talent pool consisted of 10 wealthy housewives who never worked a single day in their lives, a convicted armed robber currently sitting in a maximum security prison, a woman who tragically died in a car crash 2 years ago, and Vanessa's 4 golden retrievers. Brenda was sitting in a room rigged by federal agents bragging about committing $8.5 million in corporate fraud and framing it as saving the business. Marcus took his feet off the table and leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the wood. "Let us cut the history lesson, Brenda. I have a very busy schedule today, and I want this wrapped up." He looked at my father with utter disdain. "You harassed my employees, David. You created a highly toxic, hostile work environment, for all 28 of the brilliant executives Brenda brought in. You wrongfully terminated them yesterday afternoon without cause. I am suing you for $15 million, and I will win. It will destroy you. It will bankrupt this entire company, and it will leave you with absolutely nothing. My father buried his face in his hands, letting out a long, shaky breath. What do you want, Marcus? He asked, his voice muffled and defeated. Julian pulled a thick legal document from his breast pocket and tossed it onto the table. He slid it precisely across the smooth mahogany until it bumped against my folded hands. We want a clean break, Julian said, flashing a predatory, toothy smile. My lawyer drafted this up last night. It is a full corporate surrender and asset transfer. I looked down at the contract. It was a masterpiece of blatant extortion. Sign over your 50% future inheritance rights, Maya, Julian instructed, leaning back in his chair and wrapping his arm protectively around his pregnant mistress. You sign the document and Marcus drops the $15 million lawsuit against your father today. We take the company free and clear, and you get to keep your little house in the suburbs. I stared at the thick stack of paper, letting my hands shake just enough for Julian to notice. You are stealing my entire future, I whispered, forcing my voice to tremble. You are taking my family's legacy. We are saving you from public humiliation and total bankruptcy, sweetheart. Julian sneered, his tone dripping with condescension. If you fight this, I drag your name through the mud in divorce court. Marcus destroys your father in federal court. We take the house, we take the company, and we leave you both out on the street. So stop crying and do the smart thing for once in your pathetic life. Vanessa picked up her Hermes bag and placed it in her lap, stroking the expensive leather. Just sign the paper, Maya, she said, rolling her eyes. You were never cut out for the corporate world anyway. You belong doing low-level bookkeeping in your sweatpants. Let the real executives handle the business from here on out. I looked over at my father. He gave me a slow, subtle nod. The performance was flawless. They had laid out their extortion demands perfectly on the record, outlining their exact intentions while sitting right on top of a mountain of digital evidence. I reached out and picked up the heavy silver pen. I kept the pen suspended for 5 agonizing seconds. I let them savor the illusion of their impending multi-million-dollar payday. Then I opened my fingers. The heavy silver pen dropped. It hit the polished mahogany table with a sharp, definitive clatter that echoed through the cavernous boardroom like a gunshot. The collective flinch from Julian, Brenda, and Vanessa was instantaneous. I placed my fingertips against the edge of the contract and slowly pushed the document back across the table. It slid over the smooth wood and bumped against Julian's folded hands. I looked directly into his greedy, expectant eyes and let my terrified victim persona melt away completely. I do not think I can sign away 50% of my future inheritance, Julian, I said, my voice dropping an octave, replacing the manufactured tremor with absolute icy authority. A low mechanical hum filled the boardroom as the massive high-definition projector screen slowly descended from the ceiling directly behind my father and me. The projector flared to life, casting a harsh blue-white glow across the shocked faces of my in-laws. I clicked the remote a second time. A high-resolution scan of a heavily redacted legal charter snapped onto the screen. It was the master incorporation document for Vanguard Holdings, LLC, a private wealth trust operating out of Geneva. I clicked the remote again, zooming in on the final page of the document. There, in stark black ink, was the official equity distribution breakdown. My father retained 49% of the corporate shares. The remaining 51%, the absolute controlling interest of the entire empire, was legally bound to Vanguard Holdings. I pressed the laser pointer on my remote and circled the primary beneficiary line of the trust. My name sat right there in bold print. Julian's slick corporate attorney practically threw himself across the mahogany table, straining to read the fine print. I watched the blood rapidly drain from his face. He fell back into his chair, looking at Julian with sheer, undisguised panic. He knew exactly what he was looking at. The extortion contract they had just tried to force me to sign was completely worthless. You cannot demand someone sign over their future inheritance when they already own the majority of the company. It was not just a failed negotiation. It was documented attempted extortion against the majority shareholder. Marcus stared at the screen. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant sneer had been violently ripped from his face. "You really thought I was just sitting at home playing with spreadsheets, Vanessa?" I asked, my voice echoing against the acoustic panels of the boardroom. "You thought I was scraping together pennies from local bakeries while you masterminded international corporate espionage. I am a certified fraud examiner. I hold a Tier 3 federal security clearance. I track illicit financial networks for the Department of Justice." I walked slowly around the edge of the massive table, closing the physical distance between myself and Brenda. She shrank back into her leather chair. 5 years ago, I caught my first anomaly. I continued my tone conversational, but laced with absolute lethal precision. It was tiny. A misclassified vendor invoice for a minor logistics contract. A standard auditor would have completely missed it, or written it off as a clerical error. But I do not look at errors, Brenda. I look at patterns. I pulled the thread and found a second anomaly, then a third. You were testing the fences. You were seeing exactly how much you could siphon out of the primary operating budget before triggering an internal audit. My father looked up at me, pride radiating from his tired eyes. When I brought the initial findings to my father, we faced a massive tactical problem. I explained, gesturing toward Marcus, who was now sweating profusely. If we confronted you directly, you would have panicked. You would have immediately shredded the hard drives, burned the physical ledgers, and scattered the stolen funds across a dozen untouchable offshore accounts. We could have fired you, but we never would have recovered the money. I needed to build a watertight federal case. I needed to let you steal enough to trigger felony grand larceny charges while ensuring every single penny was tracked and recoverable. To do that, I needed to become completely invisible to you. I stopped pacing and stood directly behind Julian. He flinched. "So I played the fool," I said softly. "I played the pathetic, stubborn idiot sister you all love to mock. I wore sweatpants. I talked about struggling to pay my heating bill. I let you treat me like a glorified secretary because every single time you insulted me, you let your guard down. Every time you laughed at my supposed incompetence, you handed me another piece of the puzzle. You thought you were outsmarting a dinosaur CEO and his failure of a daughter. In reality, you were walking blindly into a federal trap I spent half a decade building." Marcus suddenly stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "The banking error." He gasped, his eyes wide with sudden terrifying realization. The 404A code on the Cayman Islands wire transfer. That was not a system glitch. I smiled warmly at him. "I scrambled the routing metadata an hour ago, Marcus. The $12 million you tried to steal this morning is currently sitting in a frozen federal holding account. The FBI has the encryption keys. You are completely locked out. You are broke." Panic erupted around the table. Julian began whispering frantically to his lawyer. Vanessa was hyperventilating, clutching her stolen Hermes bag against her chest, as if the expensive leather could somehow shield her from a federal indictment. They were trapped inside the lion's den, and they had just realized I was the lion. But Brenda refused to fold. She slammed both of her hands flat onto the mahogany table, pushing herself up to her feet. Her face was flushed with desperate rage. The color had returned to her cheeks, fueled by sheer, unadulterated venom. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. "So what if you own it?" Brenda screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "It changes absolutely nothing. We still have the discrimination lawsuit. $15 million, Maya. You cannot just magically wave that away with your little projector presentation." She leaned across the table, spittle flying from her lips. "You wrongfully terminated 28 independent contractors yesterday afternoon," Brenda yelled triumphantly. 28 highly qualified, diverse minority executives. You fired them without cause, without warning, and without severance. It is a textbook discrimination case. You think you are so smart, but you just handed me a loaded gun. If you do not sign Julian's contract right now, I will take this lawsuit straight to the press. I will call every major media outlet in the city. I will completely ruin you." You fire 28 minorities without cause, you will be ruined in the press. The media will eat you alive and cancel culture will bankrupt this company faster than I ever could. She stood there, chest heaving, believing she had just played the ultimate trump card. She thought the threat of public ruin would force me to back down. I did not back down. I did not blink. I smiled. Let us talk about those 28 employees, Brenda. Let us talk about those 28 employees, Brenda. I aimed the laser pointer at the screen and clicked the remote. The image of the Vanguard Holdings charter vanished, replaced by a massive, densely packed spreadsheet. The high-definition display illuminated the darkened boardroom with columns of raw, irrefutable data. I had color-coded the rows for maximum visual impact, showing the precise flow of stolen capital. You claimed you brought in diverse remote talent to save this company, Brenda. I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying clearly across the long mahogany table. You sat there 5 minutes ago and claimed my father created a hostile work environment for 28 high-level executives. You authorized their paychecks. You approved their quarterly bonuses. You signed off on their performance reviews. So I did what any responsible majority shareholder would do when faced with a massive wrongful termination lawsuit. I audited the payroll. I pressed the remote again. The spreadsheet zoomed in on the first column, highlighting a list of social security numbers, IP addresses, and bank routing details. Brenda stopped breathing. Her arrogant posture completely collapsed. She shrank back into the heavy leather chair, looking as though all the air had been violently sucked out of her lungs. Let us examine the first 14 names on your pristine roster of talent. I continued dragging the laser pointer across the top half of the screen. I clicked the remote and 14 official state death certificates materialized side by side with their corresponding corporate W-2 forms. Robert Miller, your supposed regional director of sales, died in a tragic boating accident in 2019, I stated clinically. Yet according to your direct HR approvals, Brenda, he has been billing this company for 80 hours a week since 2021. Eleanor Vance, your senior logistics coordinator, passed away from natural causes 4 years ago. In fact, exactly half of your top-performing remote executives are currently residing in various cemeteries across the tri-state area. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. My father sat perfectly still, watching the destruction of his tormentors with a calm, satisfied expression. You literally scoured local obituaries, I said, leaning forward slightly, planting my hands on the table. You stole the identities of dead people, opened fraudulent bank accounts in their names, and authorized bi-weekly direct deposits. Marcus then immediately swept those funds into his offshore shell companies. It is a highly creative strategy, Brenda, but stealing the identities of the deceased elevates this from simple corporate embezzlement to federal identity theft. Julian turned slowly to look at his mother. The reality of her impending federal prison sentence was dawning on his face. The smug entitlement he carried into the room had completely evaporated. But you did not stop with the deceased. I pressed the remote again. The death certificates vanished, replaced by 10 vibrant photographs of wealthy women holding wine glasses on yachts, playing tennis, and posing at exclusive country clubs. Moving on to the next 10 brilliant minds you sourced, I said, gesturing to the photos. These are your personal friends, Brenda, your weekly country club partners. I pulled their actual employment records. They all hold full-time executive positions at other corporations in California, Texas, and New York. I ran a forensic sweep of our internal network. Not a single one of their IP addresses has ever pinged our secure corporate servers. They never logged into the system. They never sent a single email. They never accessed a single file. I clicked to the next slide, showing a spider web of financial transfers. Their only contribution to this company was receiving $5,000 monthly retainer fees. They cashed the checks you authorized and then immediately kicked the funds back to your personal accounts disguised as private loans and gifts. You used your own friends as unwitting money mules to launder corporate capital. Brenda was shaking. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, strangled gasp came out. She looked pleadingly at Julian, but he physically leaned away from her, disgusted by her sheer incompetence. I saved the absolute best for last, I said, offering a bright razor-sharp smile. My absolute favorite part of your diverse talent pool involves the final 4 independent logistics consultants. I pressed the button one last time. The spreadsheet faded away completely. In its place, 4 high-resolution photographs of golden retrievers appeared on the massive screen. They were sitting in a manicured backyard, panting happily at the camera. Vanessa let out a sharp, horrified squeak. She dropped her Hermes bag onto the floor as if it had suddenly caught fire. Meet Barnaby Duke Winston and Chloe, I announced, keeping my tone completely professional. Vanessa, you really should not use your pets' names and their exact veterinary birth dates when generating fake employee identification numbers. It is incredibly sloppy. I cross-referenced the payroll profiles with the microchip registration records from your local veterinarian. You and Marcus registered 4 literal dogs as supply chain managers. You paid them an annual salary of $120,000 each. You gave golden retrievers full dental benefits, Vanessa. My father covered his mouth to stifle a laugh, pretending to cough into his fist. Marcus could not take it anymore. The calculated corporate raider facade completely shattered. He leapt to his feet, moving so violently that his heavy leather chair tipped backward and crashed onto the floor. His face was a mottled dark red and sweat was pouring down his forehead, staining the collar of his expensive dress shirt. He slammed his fist down on the mahogany table, shaking the entire surface. You hacked my personal files! Marcus screamed, his voice echoing frantically off the glass walls. That is a federal crime. You illegally accessed my private veterinary records and my secure banking details. You broke the law, Maya. None of this is admissible in court. Any judge will throw this out and throw you in a federal penitentiary for cybercrimes. I looked at him standing there sweating and desperate, trying to cling to any illusion of power. I calmly shook my head. I reached over and tapped the thick stack of legal documents Julian had thrown on the table earlier. I did not hack anything, Marcus. I said, my voice dropping to a low, deadly whisper. You submitted these fake payroll records to the court as evidence for your $15 million lawsuit. The color drained from Marcus's face so fast he looked physically ill. His mouth opened and closed, but the aggressive bluster had completely evaporated. He stared at the projected spreadsheet as if it were a physical weapon pointed directly at his chest. He finally understood the magnitude of his own catastrophic arrogance. You filed those documents into the public record yesterday afternoon, Marcus, I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the boardroom. You willingly handed them to your own attorneys, who then filed them with the district court in a desperate bid to intimidate my father. You thought you were playing hardball. You thought you were backing us into a corner, but all you did was wrap a neat little bow around your own federal indictment. I stood up from my chair and walked slowly toward his side of the mahogany table. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely zero pity. By knowingly submitting forged financial documents to a federal judge in an extortion attempt, you just committed felony perjury, obstruction of justice, and federal wire fraud. I delivered the words with clinical precision. You bypassed a simple civil dispute the exact second you attached fake W-2 forms to a sworn affidavit. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the quiet room. Brenda gripped the armrests of her chair, looking wildly between Marcus and the projection screen. Let me explain exactly how United States federal law works, Brenda. I continued, pivoting my attention to her. You authorized the transfer of exactly $8.5 million out of our primary operating budget over the last 36 months. You signed those digital disbursement forms yourself. You then routed those funds across state lines into Marcus's 4 unregistered Delaware shell companies. I clicked the remote in my hand. The spreadsheet on the screen dissolved into a detailed flowchart mapping the exact trajectory of the stolen cash. Red lines zipped from our corporate accounts in Boston straight to the fraudulent LLCs in Delaware before bouncing down to the Cayman Islands. Because you utilized electronic banking systems and the United States Postal Service to forward the registration documents across state jurisdictions, you automatically triggered federal oversight. I explained, letting the legal reality crush whatever remaining hope they held. This is no longer a localized corporate embezzlement issue. This is a multi-million-dollar interstate fraud syndicate. The Department of Justice does not view $8.5 million as a simple accounting error. They view it as organized crime. Vanessa let out a loud, dramatic sob, pressing her hands against her face. "But we just wanted the money," she wailed, her voice shrill and panicked. "We did not hurt anybody. We just wanted what we deserved." "What you deserve, Vanessa, is exactly what the federal sentencing guidelines dictate," I said sharply, silencing her instantly. "Federal wire fraud carries a maximum penalty of 20 years per count. You have hundreds of fraudulent transactions. And because the total stolen amount exceeds the $5 million threshold, you have triggered mandatory federal minimums. There is no suspended sentence for this level of corporate theft. There is no probation. There is no early release for good behavior in the federal system. You are all going to serve hard time." The alliance shattered instantly. The arrogant, unified front they had carried into the boardroom violently dissolved into self-preservation. "This was your brilliant idea," Marcus roared, spinning around to point an accusing finger directly at Brenda. "You told me the internal audits were a joke. You told me nobody was watching the regional disbursement accounts. Do not you dare put this on me!" Brenda shrieked, standing up so fast her chair crashed into the glass wall behind her. "You set up the Delaware companies. You handled the crypto transfers. I just pushed the approval buttons. You told me the money was untraceable." While they screamed at each other, turning the immaculate executive boardroom into a desperate, chaotic circus, Julian slowly stood up. He smoothed the lapels of his custom suit carefully, stepping away from his pregnant mistress. He put his hands up in a placating gesture, trying to physically distance himself from the toxic fallout erupting on the other side of the table. He looked at me with a sickeningly sweet smile, the same manipulative smile he used to charm me during our marriage. "Maya, listen to me," Julian said, his voice dripping with sudden manufactured sincerity. "This is crazy. This has gone way too far. I had absolutely no idea they were stealing from your father. I swear to you. I am completely innocent in all of this corporate mess." He took another step backward, edging toward the boardroom doors. "I had nothing to do with Marcus's business. I just want my alimony." Julian pleaded, his eyes wide and innocent. "That is it. You keep the company, you handle these criminals, and we just walk away from each other. My alimony demand is completely separate from their fraud." I stared at the man I had spent 10 years of my life with. He was a coward, a parasite willing to abandon his own co-conspirators the second the ship began to sink. He actually believed he could compartmentalize his greed and walk out of the building a wealthy man. I raised the small black remote control. I did not break eye contact with him as I pressed the button. "Julian, you really need to stop underestimating my forensic capabilities," I said, my voice turning to absolute ice. "You demanded an exorbitant monthly alimony payout, claiming you had grown accustomed to a highly specific, lavish lifestyle during our marriage. You claimed your standard of living required a massive financial settlement." I clicked the remote. The flowchart of the Delaware shell companies vanished from the massive high-definition screen. "Let us take a very close look at exactly how you funded that lavish lifestyle, Julian," I said. The screen flashed bright white before displaying a staggering collection of highly itemized financial records. It was not corporate data. It was highly sensitive, deeply personal financial information. I brought up Julian's credit card statements on the screen. "You filed those documents into the public record yesterday afternoon, Marcus," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the boardroom. "You willingly handed them to your own attorneys, who then filed them with the district court in a desperate bid to intimidate my father. You thought you were playing hardball. You thought you were backing us into a corner. But all you did was wrap a neat little bow around your own federal indictment." I stood up from my chair and walked slowly toward his side of the mahogany table. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely zero pity. By knowingly submitting forged financial documents to a federal judge in an extortion attempt, you just committed felony perjury, obstruction of justice, and federal wire fraud. I delivered the words with clinical precision. You bypassed a simple civil dispute the exact second you attached fake W-2 forms to a sworn affidavit. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the quiet room. Brenda gripped the armrests of her chair, looking wildly between Marcus and the projection screen. Let me explain exactly how United States federal law works, Brenda. I continued pivoting my attention to her. You authorized the transfer of exactly $8.5 million out of our primary operating budget over the last 36 months. You signed those digital disbursement forms yourself. You then routed those funds across state lines into Marcus's 4 unregistered Delaware shell companies. I clicked the remote in my hand. The spreadsheet on the screen dissolved into a detailed flowchart mapping the exact trajectory of the stolen cash. Red lines zipped from our corporate accounts in Boston straight to the fraudulent LLCs in Delaware before bouncing down to the Cayman Islands. Because you utilized electronic banking systems in the United States Postal Service to forward the registration documents across state jurisdictions, you automatically triggered federal oversight. I explained, letting the legal reality crush whatever remaining hope they held. This is no longer a localized corporate embezzlement issue. This is a multi-million-dollar interstate fraud syndicate. The Department of Justice does not view $8.5 million as a simple accounting error. They view it as organized crime. Vanessa let out a loud, dramatic sob, pressing her hands against her face. But we just wanted the money. She wailed, her voice shrill and panicked. We did not hurt anybody. We just wanted what we deserved. What you deserve, Vanessa, is exactly what the federal sentencing guidelines dictate, I said sharply, silencing her instantly. Federal wire fraud carries a maximum penalty of 20 years per count. You have hundreds of fraudulent transactions, and because the total stolen amount exceeds the $5 million threshold, you have triggered mandatory federal minimums. There is no suspended sentence for this level of corporate theft. There is no probation. There is no early release for good behavior in the federal system. You are all going to serve hard time. The alliance shattered instantly. The arrogant unified front they had carried into the boardroom violently dissolved into self-preservation. This was your brilliant idea, Marcus roared, spinning around to point an accusing finger directly at Brenda. You told me the internal audits were a joke. You told me nobody was watching the regional disbursement accounts. Do not you dare put this on me! Brenda shrieked, standing up so fast her chair crashed into the glass wall behind her. You set up the Delaware companies. You handled the crypto transfers. I just pushed the approval buttons. You told me the money was untraceable. While they screamed at each other, turning the immaculate executive boardroom into a desperate, chaotic circus, Julian slowly stood up. He smoothed the lapels of his custom suit carefully, stepping away from his pregnant mistress. He put his hands up in a placating gesture, trying to physically distance himself from the toxic fallout erupting on the other side of the table. He looked at me with a sickeningly sweet smile, the same manipulative smile he used to charm me during our marriage. Maya, listen to me, Julian said, his voice dripping with sudden manufactured sincerity. This is crazy. This has gone way too far. I had absolutely no idea they were stealing from your father. I swear to you, I am completely innocent in all of this corporate mess. He took another step backward, edging toward the boardroom doors. I had nothing to do with Marcus's business. I just want my alimony. Julian pleaded, his eyes wide and innocent. That is it. You keep the company, you handle these criminals, and we just walk away from each other. My alimony demand is completely separate from their fraud. I stared at the man I had spent 10 years of my life with. He was a coward, a parasite willing to abandon his own co-conspirators the second the ship began to sink. He actually believed he could compartmentalize his greed and walk out of the building a wealthy man. I raised the small black remote control. I did not break eye contact with him as I pressed the button. Julian, you really need to stop underestimating my forensic capabilities, I said, my voice turning to absolute ice. You demanded an exorbitant monthly alimony payout, claiming you had grown accustomed to a highly specific, lavish lifestyle during our marriage. You claimed your standard of living required a massive financial settlement. I clicked the remote. The flowchart of the Delaware shell companies vanished from the massive high-definition screen. Let us take a very close look at exactly how you funded that lavish lifestyle, Julian, I said. The screen flashed bright white before displaying a staggering collection of highly itemized financial records. It was not corporate data. It was highly sensitive, deeply personal financial information. I brought up Julian's credit card statements on the screen. Julian stood perfectly still, clutching his bleeding cheek. He stared at the closed doors, completely destroyed, entirely humiliated, and utterly alone. The heavy silence in the boardroom stretched out, suffocating and absolute. The illusion of his wealthy, untouchable life had evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, broken man who had just traded his freedom for a few years of stolen luxury. He slowly collapsed back into his leather chair, burying his face in his trembling hands. Brenda watched her son break. She watched the golden future she had meticulously constructed for him burn to ashes in a matter of seconds. The calculated, icy matriarch persona she had worn like armor for a decade fractured completely. Her perfectly tailored suit suddenly looked like a straitjacket. She looked at Julian, weeping into his hands, and then her gaze slowly tracked across the mahogany table until her eyes locked onto mine. I saw the exact moment her sanity snapped. She did not see a corporate executive sitting across from her. She saw the architect of her complete annihilation. A feral, unhinged rage mutated her features. Her manicured hands curled into tight, shaking claws. She let out a guttural, desperate screech that sounded more animal than human. "You little witch!" Brenda roared, her voice tearing through the quiet room. She lunged. She threw her entire body weight across the massive boardroom table. Crystal water glasses shattered as her knees hit the polished wood. Pitchers of ice water overturned, soaking the extortion contracts they had tried to force me to sign. She scrambled forward, her expensive heels kicking wildly in the air, her hands desperately reaching for my laptop and the projector remote. In her panicked boomer mentality, she actually believed that destroying the physical hardware in front of me would somehow delete the federal evidence. She thought smashing a screen would save her from prison. I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle to defend the equipment. I simply reached into the pocket of my tailored blazer and pressed the silent panic button I had activated 10 minutes ago. Before Brenda could even drag her manicured claws halfway across the table, the heavy oak doors of the executive boardroom were kicked open with bone-rattling force. The solid wood slammed violently against the frosted glass walls, cracking the pristine corporate silence like a thunderclap. Brenda froze, spread-eagled across the wet mahogany, her arm outstretched and shaking. Heavy tactical boots pounded against the hardwood floor. 7 people flooded into the room, moving with a coordinated, lethal precision that instantly drained all the remaining oxygen from the space. 4 FBI agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers fanned out, securing the exits and locking down the perimeter. Right behind them marched 3 plainclothes investigators from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They carried heavy evidence boxes and bore the grim, hardened expressions of federal reapers coming to collect their due. The ambient atmosphere of the room shifted instantly from a tense corporate dispute to an active federal crime scene. Julian scrambled backward in his chair, pressing himself against the wall in sheer terror. Vanessa covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide and unblinking. The agents completely ignored them. They ignored Marcus, who was sweating profusely in the corner. They did not even glance at my father, who sat back in his chair with a quiet, satisfied smile. The lead FBI agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a severe buzz cut, marched directly past the frantic in-laws and stopped squarely in front of my seat. "Miss Maya," the agent said, his deep voice cutting through the ringing silence, "we received your signal. Perimeter is secured and the warrants are active. Is this the complete file?" I calmly stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. I reached into my interior breast pocket and pulled out a sleek matte black encrypted solid-state drive. The metal felt heavy and cold in my palm. It was the culmination of 5 years of forensic tracking, sleepless nights, and silent endurance. I dropped the drive directly into the agent's waiting hand. "Everything you need for a RICO conviction is right here, Agent," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "You will find 10 years of offshore routing data, fraudulent vendor invoices, forged digital signatures, and documented interstate wire fraud. The encryption key has already been transmitted to your cyber division." The agent nodded, slipping the drive into a secure evidence pouch. Thank you for your cooperation. We will take it from here. Another agent stepped forward and grabbed Brenda by the shoulder, roughly dragging her off the table and shoving her back into her chair. Sit down and keep your hands flat on the table, ma'am, he ordered sharply. The word RICO hung in the air like a death sentence. Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It was the ultimate federal hammer. It meant the government was not just going to arrest them, it meant they were going to freeze every single bank account, seize every single property, and strip them of every asset they had ever touched. They would not even have the stolen money to hire defense attorneys. They were completely and utterly ruined. Marcus understood exactly what that meant. The slick corporate raider knew his offshore Cayman accounts were already burning. He knew the fake Golden Retriever LLCs were fully exposed. He looked at the federal agents securing the main doors. He looked at Brenda hyperventilating in her chair. He looked at his wife Vanessa, who was sobbing uncontrollably. Then Marcus made his choice. He abandoned them all. He spun around and bolted for the private executive side door. He moved with the sheer mindless panic of a cornered rat, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping wildly against the polished floorboards. He just wanted to escape the physical room. He did not even make it 3 steps. 2 federal agents closed the distance with terrifying speed. They hit Marcus simultaneously, driving their shoulders directly into his torso. A brutal, coordinated tackle lifted the arrogant executive completely off his feet. He hit the solid mahogany floor with a sickening heavy thud that rattled the conference table. The wind was violently knocked out of his lungs in a sharp wheeze. An agent drove his knee hard into the center of Marcus's back, pinning him flat against the floorboards. Marcus gasped and thrashed, but the agent swiftly yanked his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting closed echoed brightly through the cavernous boardroom. Vanessa watched her husband get driven face first into the ground. She stared at the federal agents pinning him down like a common street criminal. She unleashed a piercing, unhinged scream of sheer absolute terror. Her scream bounced off the acoustic ceiling panels, shattering whatever remaining illusion of control she held on to. 2 more agents swarmed Marcus, hauling his limp, cuffed body up from the mahogany floorboards. His custom-tailored suit was ruined, his nose bleeding slightly from the brutal impact against the wood. But Vanessa was not looking at him with any sense of wifely concern. She was looking at him with pure, unadulterated dread. The protective bubble of her extravagant, consequence-free reality had just been violently popped. She scrambled backward as an IRS investigator stepped toward her, holding a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The sharp metallic clinking sound sent a visible shockwave through her trembling body. "Please do not do this," Vanessa cried out, holding her hands up defensively as if she could physically push the federal agent away. Her voice was hysterical, high-pitched, and completely desperate. "You cannot arrest me. I am a mother. I have 2 young children at home waiting for me. They need me. You cannot take a mother away from her babies." The agent did not even blink. He reached forward with clinical precision and grabbed her left wrist. Vanessa twisted away frantically, turning her wild, tear-streaked face toward me. "Maya, please." She shrieked, the sound tearing from her throat as she completely abandoned her pride. "We are family. You cannot let them do this to me." I did not know what Marcus was doing behind closed doors. "I swear to God, I just signed the corporate papers he told me to sign. My kids need me, Maya. You are their aunt. Please tell them to stop this right now." I did not feel a single ounce of pity for the woman sobbing uncontrollably in front of me. Her tears were entirely manufactured, born from the terror of getting caught, rather than any genuine remorse for the millions she had stolen. I walked slowly around the edge of the shattered crystal glass and spilled ice water covering the massive conference table. I stopped right next to the chair she had just vacated. Sitting perfectly upright on the polished wood was Vanessa's most prized possession. It was a rare Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag. I reached out and picked it up by its pristine leather handles. The gold hardware gleamed under the bright boardroom lights. It was a bag that cost more than most people made in 3 years of grueling manual labor. I looked from the exorbitant bag directly into Vanessa's panicked, bloodshot eyes. "You bought this bag on May 14th, Vanessa," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, cutting cleanly through her hysterical sobbing. "You purchased it at a private auction in New York for exactly $185,000. But you did not use your personal savings. You paid for it with a direct digital wire transfer from Apex Consulting." Vanessa froze. Her frantic crying abruptly hitched in her throat. Her eyes darted from the bag in my hand back to my face. "Apex Consulting is a fake vendor account Marcus set up." I continued, letting the forensic truth sink its teeth deep into her manufactured victimhood. "Apex Consulting billed my father's corporation for non-existent supply chain software. You authorized that specific invoice yourself, Vanessa. You signed the digital approval and routed my father's stolen money directly to the auction house to buy a purse. You bypassed corporate oversight to fund your wardrobe. You knew exactly what you were doing." I dropped the Birkin bag carelessly onto the floor. It hit the hardwood with a heavy, disrespectful thud, tumbling over and spilling a designer makeup compact and a set of luxury car keys across the floorboards. "Do not ever use your children as a shield for your insatiable greed," I told her, stepping closer so she could see the absolute zero tolerance in my expression. "Your kids do not need a mother who steals from her own family to buy luxury goods. They need a mother who understands the basic concept of consequences. You built their entire childhood on a foundation of federal wire fraud and embezzlement. You are going to pay the price for every single stolen dollar, and you are going to do it in a federal penitentiary." Vanessa opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came out. She looked down at her discarded bag lying in the dust, and then back up at the federal agents surrounding her. The manicured facade of the wealthy, untouchable suburban socialite had completely melted away, leaving only a terrified criminal caught red-handed in her own trap. A female IRS criminal investigator stepped smoothly past me, holding a thick manila folder. She looked at Vanessa with the clinical, detached expression of an auditor who had dismantled 1,000 wealthy frauds before her. "Mrs. Vanessa Sterling," the IRS agent said, her voice crisp and heavily authoritative, "I am officially informing you that the Internal Revenue Service has initiated immediate asset forfeiture protocols under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." Vanessa shook her head weakly, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "Asset forfeiture," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ringing silence of the room. "Yes, ma'am," the agent confirmed, opening the folder and reading from the heavily stamped document inside. "We have already dispatched tactical teams to your primary residence. Furthermore, we are currently executing a federal seizure of your vacation home in Aspen, Colorado. That property was purchased almost entirely with funds diverted through the Apex Consulting Shell Company. It is now property of the federal government. It no longer belongs to you." Vanessa swayed heavily on her feet, her face draining of all remaining color until she looked entirely translucent. "The Aspen House," she gasped, clutching her chest as if she could not draw enough oxygen into her tight lungs. "That is just the beginning." The IRS agent continued, closing the folder with a sharp, definitive snap that echoed through the room. "As of 5 o'clock this evening, every single bank account registered to your name, your husband's name, and your associated LLCs will be completely frozen. Your platinum credit cards are dead. Your offshore investment portfolios are locked. You have absolutely zero access to any financial resources effective immediately." The words hit Vanessa like a relentless physical barrage. The Aspen House, the bank accounts, the credit cards. The entire lavish empire she had stolen from my father's company was evaporating right in front of her eyes, leaving her with absolutely nothing. She was not just going to prison. She was going to be completely and utterly destitute. Vanessa let out a short, high-pitched gasp. Her eyes rolled back into her head. Her knees buckled instantly, giving out completely beneath her. She collapsed backward, fainting directly into the heavy leather executive chair behind her. Her body went completely limp, her arms dangling uselessly over the armrests, as the sheer, crushing weight of her total destruction shut down her conscious mind. The heavy thud of Vanessa's body collapsing into the leather executive chair went completely ignored by the federal agents. Two paramedics attached to the FBI raid team stepped into the boardroom with clinical efficiency, checking her pulse and securing her airway, but nobody else spared her a second glance. The remaining agents were entirely focused on securing the primary targets. Brenda sat frozen at the head of the table. The manicured hands that had just tried to claw my eyes out were now trembling violently against the wet mahogany. She watched Marcus thrashing weakly against the floorboards as a federal agent tightened the heavy steel cuffs around his wrists. She looked at Julian, who was curled into a pathetic sobbing ball in the corner, refusing to look at his mother. Her gaze finally landed on the lead FBI agent, who was sealing the encrypted hard drive into an airtight evidence bag. The drive contained every forged signature, every illegal offshore transfer, every damning piece of digital DNA Brenda had left behind over the last 5 years. The psychological dam holding Brenda's massive ego together shattered completely. The icy calculating matriarch who had spent the last decade treating me like an expendable bank account vanished. She realized with terrifying absolute certainty that she was not walking out of this building to a waiting town car. She was not going back to her sprawling estate. She was going into a federal holding cell, and she would likely die in one. Brenda's knees buckled. She slid out of her expensive leather chair and dropped heavily onto the polished hardwood floor. Her designer skirt bunched up around her thighs, but she did not care. She crawled awkwardly around the edge of the massive table, ignoring the shattered crystal, and spilled water soaking into her clothes. She dragged herself directly to my feet. "Maya, sweetie, please listen to me," Brenda pleaded, looking up at me with wide, desperate eyes. Tears streaked her perfect makeup, leaving dark, ugly tracks down her pale cheeks. "I always thought of you as a daughter. You know that, do not you? We are family. We can fix this internally. We can hire accountants to reverse the transfers. We will give every single penny back to your father. Just please call them off. Call off the feds, Maya. I am begging you." She reached out, trying to grab the hem of my tailored blazer. I took a deliberate step backward, letting her grasping hands close around empty air. I looked down at the woman who had spent years engineering my financial destruction. I felt absolutely nothing but clinical disgust. The satisfaction of seeing the woman who had tormented me for so long reduced to a blubbering mess was profound, but I did not let it show on my face. I slowly crouched down, bringing my face perfectly level with hers. I wanted her to look directly into my eyes and see the absolute void where my mercy used to be. "You told me a divorce means I cut off your family's livelihood, Brenda," I said, my voice low, smooth, and razor sharp. "You stood in my kitchen exactly 2 weeks ago and threatened to ruin me. You told me I was nothing without your son. You were right about one thing. I did cut off your livelihood, but you forgot one crucial detail. Parasites do not have a livelihood. They just steal someone else's." Brenda let out a ragged, choking sob. She pressed her hands together in a frantic, praying gesture. It was Marcus. She shrieked desperately, throwing her own son to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. It was his idea, Maya. He set up the Delaware shell companies. He handled the crypto laundering. I did not know the extent of the fraud. I am an old woman. They manipulated me into signing those corporate approval forms. You have to believe me. I stood back up, towering over her kneeling form. "You are the sole signatory on the Vanguard logistics accounts, Brenda," I stated loudly, making sure the federal agents heard every single word. "You personally authorized the transfer of over $8 million out of our operating budget. You bought the Aspen vacation home. You paid off Julian's credit cards. You orchestrated the entire syndicate. You are not a manipulated victim. You are the architect." I turned my attention to the lead FBI agent, who had been standing quietly a few feet away, allowing the interaction to play out for the body cameras recording the raid. "Agent," I said, nodding toward Brenda, who was now weeping hysterically against the floorboards. "She is all yours." The tall, broad-shouldered agent stepped forward. He reached down, grabbing Brenda by the arms of her expensive tailored suit, and hauled her forcefully to her feet. She struggled weakly, her legs turning to jelly, but he held her up with effortless strength. He spun her around, pressing her chest flat against the cold glass wall of the boardroom. "Brenda Sterling," the agent announced, his voice booming with absolute federal authority. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act." He pulled her arms firmly behind her back. "You have the right to remain silent." The agent continued, reciting the Miranda warning with practiced mechanical precision. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." The metal bit into her wrists, a stark contrast to the diamond bracelets she normally wore. Brenda let out a pathetic whimpering noise, slumping against the glass, as the reality of the cold steel secured her fate. The arrogant, commanding woman who had dictated terms to my father and treated me like a stepping stone was entirely gone. She was just another criminal caught in the act. I watched as the agents began processing the room. Marcus was hauled to his feet, his nose bleeding onto his crisp white collar. He glared at his mother, realizing she had just tried to pin the entire criminal enterprise on him. Julian remained in his chair, practically catatonic, as an IRS investigator began reading him his own set of rights regarding tax evasion on his massive unreported income. The boardroom, once a symbol of their corporate theft and unchecked power, had been transformed into the staging ground for their ultimate downfall. The high-definition screen still glowed brightly behind them, illuminating the very financial records that had sealed their doom. "Take them out," the lead agent instructed, gesturing toward the executive doors. Brenda was marched toward the exit, her expensive heels dragging awkwardly across the mahogany floor. She looked back at me one last time, her face a mask of absolute ruin. The click of the handcuffs echoed loudly in the silent, luxurious boardroom, marking the definitive end of her reign. With Brenda completely subdued and Marcus pinned securely against the hardwood, the remaining federal agents turned their unified attention to the far corner of the room. Julian was still pressed flat against the glass wall, his breathing shallow and rapid. He watched his mother being hauled toward the door and his brother bleeding on the floorboards. The absolute certainty of his own impending fate finally shattered the last fragile remnants of his entitled delusion. An IRS criminal investigator stepped toward him, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. The sharp metallic rattling sound made Julian flinch violently. He threw his hands up in a desperate placating gesture, tears welling instantly in his perfectly manicured eyes. "Maya, please do not do this." Julian sobbed, his voice cracking and pitching into a pathetic high whine that echoed off the acoustic ceiling panels. He stumbled forward, falling heavily onto his knees right in front of my expensive leather chair. He looked up at me with absolute sheer terror, his pristine custom suit wrinkling against the hardwood floor. He abandoned every single ounce of the smug superiority he had carried into this building. "We were married for 10 years, Maya." He pleaded, clasping his trembling hands together as if he were praying to a deity he had just remembered existed. "You cannot just erase 10 years of our life together. I know I made mistakes. I know I was stupid and weak, but I can fix this. I will drop the alimony demand right now. I will sign whatever divorce papers you want. I will walk away with absolutely nothing. I will be a better man, Maya. I will even testify against Marcus and my mother. I will tell the feds everything they want to know. Just please tell them to let me go. I will do whatever you want. I swear to God I will do whatever you ask." I looked down at the man I had once pledged my life to, the man I had shared a home with for a decade. He was reduced to a sniveling coward, bargaining away his pride, his family, and his unborn child just to save his own skin. He truly believed his superficial charm and his pathetic bargaining could somehow rewind the clock and undo a massive federal conspiracy. He was willing to sell out his own mother without a second of hesitation, just to avoid facing the consequences of his own greed. I slowly leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table. I looked directly into his panicked red-rimmed eyes, feeling an overwhelming wave of absolute closure. You did not just cheat on me, Julian, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, lethal whisper that sliced cleanly through his hysterical sobbing. If you had just slept with someone else, we would have had a quiet divorce, and you would have faded into irrelevant obscurity. But you did not stop there. You actively conspired to bankrupt my father. You helped your mother and your brother try to destroy my family legacy so you could steal our corporate assets to fund your mistress. Julian opened his mouth to deny it, but his voice failed him, resulting in a pathetic, choking gasp. He knew the encrypted hard drive I had handed the FBI contained every single wire transfer logging his stolen lifestyle. There was no spinning the digital evidence. You thought you were a corporate mastermind. I continued, standing up and stepping away from his kneeling form. You thought you were entitled to my family's wealth. But you forgot that you bring absolutely zero value to the table, Julian. The only paper you will be signing from now on is a commissary slip in a federal prison. I gave a sharp nod to the IRS agent standing behind him. The investigator did not hesitate. He grabbed Julian by the collar of his tailored jacket and hoisted him roughly to his feet. Julian let out a loud, pathetic wail as his arms were wrenched behind his back. The heavy steel cuffs ratcheted shut, biting into his wrists with a harsh, definitive click. The executive boardroom, which just an hour ago had been the stage for their arrogant extortion attempt, was now a fully secured staging area for their complete destruction. The lead FBI agent gave a hand signal to his tactical team. It was time for the perp walk. Line them up. The lead agent ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. We are taking them out through the main lobby. The agents moved with practiced efficiency. Brenda was positioned at the front of the line, her expensive heels dragging as an agent held her firmly by the bicep. She kept her head down, her face pale and completely devoid of all its former terrifying control. Marcus came next, his nose still leaking a slow trickle of blood onto his ruined shirt. He glared fiercely at the floorboards, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Vanessa stumbled behind him, sobbing loudly, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face, as she continued to quietly hyperventilate about her frozen bank accounts. Julian brought up the rear. His shoulders slumped in total defeat, crying softly into his chest. I turned away from the pathetic procession and looked at my father. He had remained seated at the far end of the table, watching the entire federal raid unfold with a quiet, stoic dignity. The weight of the last 5 years of stress and betrayal seemed to have physically lifted from his shoulders. He looked 10 years younger, his eyes shining with a fierce protective pride. "Dad," I said, breaking his focused observation, "the federal agents are about to march them out. The lobby is going to be packed." My father stood up slowly, smoothing his tie. He looked at me, a deep, genuine smile finally breaking across his weathered face. He understood exactly what needed to happen next. "I need you to open the internal communication system," I instructed, gesturing toward the executive console set into the boardroom wall. "Trigger a company-wide alert. Tell every single employee in the building to step out of their offices and look down at the main atrium." My father nodded firmly. He reached over to the console and pressed the global broadcast button. The intercom system chimed twice, indicating that every speaker on every floor of the corporate tower was now live and listening. The people who really built this company deserve to know the truth. I said, my voice steady and resolute. Brenda and Marcus spent years treating our employees like disposable garbage while stealing their hard-earned profits. It is time they saw exactly what happens to parasites. My father leaned into the microphone. "Attention all staff," he announced, his deep, booming voice resonating clearly through the entire building. "Please step out of your offices and direct your attention to the main lobby. We have a highly important corporate exit taking place. The real employees are about to get a show." My father lowered the microphone and turned away from the intercom console. We walked out of the shattered executive boardroom, leaving the ghosts of their extortion plot behind us. The federal agents had already marched Brenda, Marcus, Vanessa, and Julian toward the glass elevators at the end of the executive corridor. The heavy steel doors slid open, and the federal reapers packed their targets inside. We took the adjacent elevator, riding the smooth descent down to the main atrium in profound silence. My father stood tall, his hands clasped firmly behind his back. The corporate parasite that had been draining his life's work was finally being excised. The transparent elevator car sank through the center of the building, offering a complete panoramic view of the massive corporate lobby. The space was normally a bustling center of highly paid executives and rushing assistants. Now it was a sea of absolute stillness. Hundreds of employees had answered my father's intercom summons. They lined the sweeping mahogany staircases crowded against the glass balconies on the second and third floors and completely filled the ground-level marble floor. They stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a dense living corridor that stretched from the elevator banks all the way to the front revolving glass doors. The elevator chimed loudly, cutting through the heavy tension in the air. The polished steel doors slid apart. The lead FBI agent stepped out first, his dark tactical windbreaker acting as a stark warning. He firmly grabbed Marcus by the bicep and shoved him forward. Marcus stumbled, his Italian leather shoes scraping clumsily against the marble. Brenda was dragged out right behind him, her manicured claws pinned tightly behind her back in heavy steel cuffs. Julian and Vanessa followed, heads bowed and weeping uncontrollably. The in-laws stepped into the gauntlet of the people they had tormented for half a decade. I watched the faces of the real, hard-working employees as Brenda and Marcus were paraded past them like captured war criminals. I saw Sarah, the accounting manager Marcus had verbally abused and threatened to fire just last week for daring to question an offshore vendor invoice. She stood at the front of the crowd, her arms crossed over her chest, staring Marcus directly in the eye. I saw David, the logistics director Brenda had forced to take a massive pay cut so she could siphon his departmental budget into her fake LLCs. I saw the entry-level assistants who had been screamed at for bringing the wrong coffee, and the senior analysts who had their bonuses stolen to fund Vanessa's designer handbags. The staff who had suffered through years of extreme micromanagement, toxic gaslighting, and outright corporate bullying just to keep their jobs now watched the architects of their misery being marched out in federal chains. At first, the lobby was completely silent. The sheer shock of seeing the untouchable Sterling family reduced to handcuffed prisoners held everyone entirely speechless. Brenda kept her chin tucked tightly to her chest, desperately trying to hide her tear-streaked face behind her messy hair. Marcus glared at the floorboards, sweating profusely. Then a single sharp sound broke the quiet. It was a slow, deliberate clap. I looked up to the second-floor balcony and saw the head of Human Resources striking his hands together. A second later, someone on the ground floor joined in, then another. Within 5 seconds, the tentative clapping mutated into a massive, thunderous roar of absolute vindication. Hundreds of employees erupted into cheers, whistles, and deafening applause. The sound bounced off the high glass ceilings, creating a tidal wave of pure, unfiltered justice. Brenda flinched violently as the cheers washed over her. The sound of her own employees celebrating her arrest was a far worse punishment than any physical blow. She realized in that exact moment that not a single person in this entire building respected her. They despised her. She was not a brilliant corporate leader. She was a tyrannical thief, and they were rejoicing in her absolute downfall. Marcus tried to maintain his arrogant scowl, but the sheer volume of the applause visibly rattled him. He shrunk in on himself, his broad shoulders hunching forward as he was forced to walk the endless marble runway of shame. Julian sobbed louder, hiding his face behind Vanessa's shoulder. Vanessa just squeezed her eyes shut, whimpering, as the deafening applause signaled the permanent end of her luxury shopping sprees. The employees did not hold back. They shouted taunts and jeers, demanding that the agents take out the trash. I watched a senior developer, a man who had almost lost his home because Marcus refused to approve his earned commissions, pull out his phone and start recording. He wanted the memory of Marcus Sterling shuffling in iron cuffs to keep forever. The collective catharsis was palpable. Years of unpaid overtime, stolen bonuses, and constant psychological warfare were being avenged in a single glorious march across the corporate floor. Brenda's legs gave out twice, forcing the agents to physically drag her the last 30 feet. Her pristine suit jacket tore at the shoulder, but there was no one left to care. She had demanded total obedience through fear, and now that the fear was gone, there was nothing left but raw, undeniable hatred from the people she had stepped on. The federal agents maintained a brutal, relentless pace. They pushed the crying in-laws straight through the roaring crowd and toward the massive front exit. The FBI had specifically parked their heavy black SUVs right at the curb, directly in front of the main glass doors. But they were not the only ones waiting outside. Someone inside the building had tipped off the local news networks the moment the federal raid began. As the agents shoved the revolving doors open, a blinding barrage of camera flashes exploded against the darkening afternoon sky. 4 different local news vans were parked haphazardly along the street, their satellite dishes fully extended. A massive swarm of reporters, cameramen, and aggressive paparazzi blocked the sidewalk, shouting questions at the top of their lungs. "Brenda Sterling, is it true you embezzled millions from your own family?" A reporter screamed, shoving a microphone aggressively toward her face. "Marcus, how do you plead to the federal RICO charges?" Another journalist yelled, snapping photos of his bleeding nose and handcuffed wrists. Brenda squeezed her eyes shut against the blinding strobe lights, letting out a guttural shriek as she blindly attempted to shield her face with her shoulder. The FBI agents forcefully parted the sea of aggressive reporters, creating a narrow path to the waiting vehicles. They grabbed Brenda by the collar and shoved her unceremoniously into the back of a federal SUV. Marcus was thrown in right beside her, his head slamming awkwardly against the doorframe. Julian and Vanessa were packed into the second vehicle, the doors slamming shut with a heavy metallic thud that permanently severed them from their wealthy, untouchable lives. I stood inside the warm lobby, standing shoulder to shoulder with my father and the cheering employees. I watched the bright red and blue emergency lights strobe through the glass doors, illuminating the absolute destruction of the Sterling family. Their unhinged arrogance and their insatiable greed had finally caught up to them. Their entire legacy of manipulation, theft, and cruelty was currently being broadcast live on evening television to the entire city. The flashing emergency lights slowly faded into the distance as the caravan of federal vehicles pulled away from the corporate plaza. The roar of the employees in the lobby gradually shifted from deafening applause to a low, buzzing murmur of excited disbelief. The nightmare was truly over. I turned away from the massive glass doors and caught my father's eye. He gave a subtle tilt of his head, gesturing back toward the private executive elevators. We slipped away from the celebrating crowd, leaving the human resources team to manage the jubilant chaos. We rode the elevator back up to the 40th floor in a comfortable, companionable silence. The executive boardroom was a completely different world now. Just an hour ago, it had been a pressure cooker of extortion and malice. Now it was entirely silent. The heavy oak doors hung slightly off their hinges from where the FBI tactical team had breached the room. The polished mahogany table was still covered in spilled ice water and the glittering shards of the crystal glasses Brenda had shattered during her feral lunge. My father walked straight past the mess. He moved over to the discreet wet bar built into the far wall and opened the mahogany cabinet. He reached past the standard corporate wine and pulled out a bottle of 30-year-old single malt scotch that he only reserved for monumental occasions. The clinking of heavy crystal tumblers filled the quiet room. He poured 2 generous measures, the amber liquid catching the ambient light of the city skyline glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He walked back over and handed me a glass. He did not speak immediately. He just looked at me, taking in the sight of his daughter, who had just single-handedly dismantled a sophisticated federal crime syndicate. He raised his glass, tapping it gently against mine. "I always knew sending you to get that accounting degree was the best investment I ever made," David said, his deep voice thick with genuine pride. I smiled, taking a slow, burning sip of the scotch. The liquid fire tracked down my throat, warming the lingering chill of the adrenaline crash. It paid much better dividends than Marcus's fake offshore vendor accounts, I replied, leaning back against the edge of the wet bar. My father chuckled, a rich, hearty sound that I had not heard from him since the audits first began. He walked over to the windows, looking out over the sprawling city, observing the empire he had built and nearly lost. "Let us talk logistics." he said, slipping effortlessly back into his pragmatic business mindset. The feds have the hard drive, and the physical arrests are complete. But we still have an $8.5 million hole in our operating budget. The board is going to want an immediate update by tomorrow morning. I set my glass down on the counter and pulled out my secondary encrypted tablet. I had already modeled the entire recovery projection while the Sterlings were busy plotting my demise. "We are completely covered," I assured him, pulling up the corporate insurance policy documents and sliding the tablet across the bar. I triggered the forensic audit clauses the moment I found the first forged signature on the Apex Consulting invoices. Our corporate fraud insurance policy guarantees full restitution of the missing $8.5 million within 30 days. The underwriter has already been tracking the federal warrants. We will not miss a single payroll cycle. My father nodded, taking another sip of his scotch. "And the Sterling family assets. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division is moving faster than I anticipated," I replied, pulling up a live tracking file. "The Aspen vacation home is already padlocked and formally seized. Marcus's Cayman Island accounts were frozen at exactly 5:00. They are currently liquidating Brenda's private estate and seizing Vanessa's luxury vehicles. The federal government will auction off every single asset they purchased with our stolen funds to repay the insurance company. They are stripped bare. They do not even have the capital to retain private defense attorneys. They will be relying on public defenders for their RICO trials." "And the hostile takeover lawsuit Marcus filed against us?" my father asked, raising an eyebrow. "Dead in the water," I confirmed. "You cannot sue a corporation for a breach of contract when the contract itself is the foundation of a federal racketeering indictment. The judge will throw the entire civil case out by noon tomorrow." My father let out a long breath of absolute relief. He looked around the damaged boardroom and then back at me. His expression turned incredibly serious, shedding the casual relief of the moment. "I am tired, Maya," he admitted, his voice carrying the weight of his 70 years. "I have spent the last decade building this company and the last 5 years blindly trusting the wrong people to help me run it. I let Brenda dictate terms because I wanted to keep the peace. If you had not been quietly watching the numbers, tracking the routing data, and sacrificing your own peace of mind to build this trap, we would have lost everything." He walked over and placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. "I have been the face of this corporation for a long time," he said, looking directly into my eyes. "But you are the brain that just saved it. I am stepping down as Chief Executive Officer effective at the emergency board meeting tomorrow morning." I blinked, caught entirely off guard by the sudden announcement. "Dad, you do not have to do that," I said. "I know I do not have to," he replied firmly. "I want to. I want to retire and play golf, and finally take your mother on that European cruise I promised her 10 years ago. It is time for you to step into the light, Maya. You are not just a silent partner or a forensic auditor anymore. You are going to take the active CEO role. You earned this company today." I looked at my father, seeing the absolute certainty in his eyes. There was no hesitation or doubt. He was handing over the empire he had built from scratch because he knew without a shadow of a doubt that I could protect it. I felt a profound sense of purpose settle over me, replacing the lingering exhaustion of the raid. "I will not let you down," I promised, my voice ringing with quiet, absolute conviction. "I know you will not." He smiled, draining the last of his scotch. Before we could discuss the corporate transition any further, a sharp metallic buzz vibrated from the pocket of my tailored blazer. I reached in and pulled out my personal cell phone. The screen illuminated the dim boardroom, displaying an urgent priority email notification. I tapped the screen, opening the secure message. The sender was Robert Harrington, the aggressive, high-priced divorce attorney Julian had hired to financially destroy me. I read the brief legal text and let out a sharp laugh that echoed off the frosted glass walls. "What is it?" my father asked, setting his empty glass on the bar. I turned the phone screen around so he could read the stark black and white text. It was a formal legal withdrawal. Harrington had just watched his client get shoved into the back of an FBI vehicle on live television for federal racketeering. The attorney knew immediately that Julian's stolen funds were permanently frozen and that his exorbitant legal fees would never be paid. He was abandoning a sinking ship. Julian's lawyer just formally withdrew the petition for alimony. I announced reading the rest of the attachment. He included a digitally signed waiver from Julian, relinquishing all claims to any marital assets, properties, or future corporate earnings. Julian signed the final divorce decree right before they put him in the federal transport vehicle. He formally closed the divorce case. My father smiled a ruthless, satisfied smirk. He is officially a public defender's problem now. I locked my phone screen and slipped it back into my pocket. The heavy, suffocating weight of the Sterling family was finally completely gone. I was standing in the boardroom of the company I was about to lead, totally exonerated and financially secure. I was completely legally free. Exactly 1 month later, the heavy oak doors of the United States District Court swung shut behind me, cutting off the noise of the busy Boston streets. I walked through the metal detectors and rode the elevator up to the 6th floor. The air inside the federal building was sterile and cold, a sharp contrast to the warm mahogany executive suites my former-in-laws were accustomed to. I took a seat in the back row of the gallery, my posture straight and my expression carefully neutral. I was not here for vengeance or to gloat. I was here to witness the final accounting. The heavy side door near the judge's bench clicked open. The rhythmic metallic clinking of heavy chains echoed through the quiet courtroom. A line of federal marshals marched into the room leading the defendants. The sight of them was jarring. The untouchable Sterling family had been completely stripped of their armor. Gone were the tailored Italian suits, the silk blouses, and the pristine manicures. They were dressed in identical oversized orange jumpsuits. Their hands were secured in waist chains, and their ankles were shackled together, forcing them to take small, shuffling steps. Brenda was the first to take her seat at the defense table. She looked as though she had aged 2 decades in 30 days. Her aggressively styled hair hung flat and graying at the roots, stripped of her expensive salon treatments. The terrifying authority she had wielded for years was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, wide-eyed panic. Marcus sat heavily beside her. The looming physical intimidation he relied on was completely neutralized by the federal restraints. He kept his gaze locked on the scarred wooden table, refusing to look back at the gallery. Vanessa was guided to the seat next to him, her shoulders shaking violently. She was already weeping, her face red and blotchy, without her customary layer of flawless makeup. Julian was the last to be seated. He looked gaunt, his cheekbones jutting out harshly against his pale skin. He was a ghost of the smug, entitled man who had demanded my corporate shares just a few weeks ago. The bailiff announced the judge and everyone rose. The federal judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for corporate thieves, took her seat and immediately began reviewing the extensive docket. The assistant United States attorney stood up to address the issue of bail. Your Honor, the prosecution strongly requests that bail be denied for Brenda and Marcus Sterling. The prosecutor stated, his voice echoing clearly across the courtroom. We have presented concrete evidence of their offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Given the vast network of shell companies they utilize to embezzle $8.5 million, they represent an extreme flight risk. They have the international connections to disappear tonight. Brenda opened her mouth to protest, but her public defender immediately placed a hand on her arm, forcing her to remain silent. The judge barely glanced at the defense table before nodding sharply. Based on the evidence of offshore financial maneuvering and the severity of the racketeering charges, bail is denied. The judge announced, her gavel striking the sound block with a definitive crack. The defendants will be remanded to federal custody pending trial. Brenda let out a ragged gasp, slumping forward in her chair. Marcus simply closed his eyes, a muscle in his jaw ticking as the reality of a narrow concrete cell settled over him. The judge then turned her attention to Vanessa. The prosecution outlined the specific felony counts of money laundering and receiving stolen corporate funds. Vanessa sobbed louder, her chest heaving as the prosecutor entered a new document into the official record. Furthermore, Your Honor, the defendant is currently a severe flight risk due to recent developments in family court, the prosecutor added. Yesterday afternoon, the defendant's ex-husband was granted emergency full custody of their children based entirely on these federal felony charges. She has no remaining ties holding her to this jurisdiction. A harsh wail tore from Vanessa's throat. She buried her face in her shackled hands, weeping uncontrollably. She had happily funded her luxury cars and designer closets with money stolen from my father's company. Now that very same stolen wealth had cost her the right to raise her own children. The judge showed absolutely no sympathy, ordering her remanded without bail alongside her mother and brother. Finally, the judge looked down at the documents concerning Julian. I watched my former husband shrink under the intense judicial scrutiny. Julian Sterling, you are facing multiple counts of complicity in wire fraud and active participation in a federal conspiracy. The judge read her voice devoid of any warmth. The federal sentencing guidelines for these specific charges carry a maximum penalty of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Julian flinched as if he had been physically struck. 10 years. He had traded a decade of marriage and a comfortable, quiet life for the delusion that he was a corporate mastermind. He had conspired to bankrupt my family, to steal our legacy, and to fund his mistress. Now his grand reward was a decade behind bars. He looked frantically toward his mother and his brother, but they did not look back. They were drowning in their own ruined lives. There was no one left to bail him out. The judge struck the gavel one final time, bringing the initial hearing to a close. The federal marshals immediately stepped forward, grabbing the defendants by the arms and hauling them to their feet. The clinking of the chains resumed as the in-laws were turned around to face the side exit. As they began their slow, shuffling march back to the holding cells, Julian hesitated. He dragged his feet, turning his head to scan the gallery. His hollow, red-rimmed eyes locked directly onto mine. He looked at me sitting calmly in the back row, wearing a sharp-tailored suit and breathing the free air. The absolute finality of his choices hit him all at once. He had thrown away a woman who loved him for the approval of a toxic family that had instantly discarded him the moment the FBI kicked the doors in. Julian parted his lips. I watched his mouth form a single silent word across the crowded courtroom. Sorry. I looked at the man I had spent 10 years with. I did not smile. I did not glare. I felt absolutely no need to gloat or revel in his destruction. The burning anger and the crushing betrayal that had fueled my silent investigation for months had completely evaporated. Looking at him now, I felt nothing at all. He was simply a stranger in an orange jumpsuit. I broke eye contact, turning my back on the pathetic procession. I pushed through the heavy oak doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the bright morning sunlight. The air was crisp and clean. I walked down the courthouse steps, ready to head back to the office and lead my company into the future, leaving the Sterling family entirely in the past. They were no longer relevant to my existence. The transition from the courthouse steps to the corporate headquarters took exactly 20 minutes. I bypassed the main lobby atrium where the ghost of the perp walk still lingered and took the private executive elevator directly to the top floor. The heavy steel doors parted with a soft chime, revealing a space that finally breathed. I pushed open the double doors to the CEO office and stepped inside. The physical transformation was complete. The suffocating, oppressive manifestation of Brenda Sterling had been entirely eradicated. The contractors had worked overtime over the weekend to rip out every last trace of her. The gaudy gold leaf trim, the heavy velvet drapery that blocked the natural light, and the ridiculous crystal chandeliers, purchased with embezzled vendor funds, were all gone. They had stripped away the mirrored walls she used to constantly admire herself and tore up the plush white carpeting that she had demanded everyone remove their shoes before walking on. The sickeningly sweet smell of her signature perfume had finally been scrubbed from the ventilation system. The space was now sleek, professional, and grounded in reality. Clean lines of rich, dark mahogany and brushed steel framed the room. The floor-to-ceiling windows were completely unobstructed, allowing bright natural sunlight to flood the expansive office. It was a space designed for actual work, not for feeding a toxic, fragile ego. It was entirely mine. I walked over to the massive solid wood desk and set my briefcase down on the polished surface. The leather handle released from my grip, and with it went the last residual tension in my shoulders. I took a seat in the high-backed leather chair, running my hands over the cool, smooth surface of the desk. A neat stack of manila folders waited in the center of the leather blotter. I opened the top file and pulled out my favorite fountain pen. The document was a final confirmation packet from our corporate insurance underwriter and the Federal Restitution Division. The stolen $8.5 million had officially cleared. The funds were fully deposited back into the company operating accounts. The lifeblood of my father's corporation had been completely restored. I signed my name at the bottom of the page, the ink flowing smoothly across the paper. Maya Davis, Chief Executive Officer. I leaned back in the chair, turning my chair to face the sprawling city skyline spread out beneath my window. The reflection in the glass showed a woman who had survived a masterclass in deception and emerged completely victorious. For years, I had allowed myself to fade into the background. I had absorbed their constant, thinly veiled insults, their passive-aggressive digs, and their outright condescending remarks with a tight, polite smile. I remembered sitting at a lavish dinner party paid for by my father's company, listening to Julian laugh with his colleagues about my useless freelance gigs. He had confidently called my meticulous accounting work a cute little hobby to keep me busy while he handled the real business of wealth management. He had told his friends that I lacked ambition. Brenda had frequently cornered me at family gatherings, telling me I lacked the killer instinct required for the corporate world. She had patted my cheek with her manicured hand and advised me to stick to my little spreadsheets and leave the heavy lifting to the adults. She had constantly reminded me that I was lucky Julian had married down to bring me into their elevated social sphere. Marcus had outright ignored my presence, treating me like an invisible piece of furniture in my own home. They had all looked right at me and seen a naive, quiet wife who would never dare question their authority or unravel their sophisticated offshore networks. Their collective arrogance was their ultimate fatal flaw. They were so completely blinded by their own bloated egos and their insatiable greed that they never once considered I was actually paying attention. Every time Julian complained about my late nights working on my useless spreadsheets, he never realized I was systematically tracking the IP addresses of his shell companies. Every time Brenda mocked my lack of a killer instinct, she failed to notice I was quietly gathering the very vendor invoices she was forging. Every time Marcus dismissed me, I was securing the offshore banking routing numbers that would ultimately put him in an orange jumpsuit. I had weaponized their underestimation of me. I had stayed silent. I had stayed compliant. I had watched them steal, lie, and manipulate their way through my family's legacy. I did not strike when I first discovered the discrepancies. I waited with absolute lethal patience. I let them build their fraudulent empire so high that its eventual collapse would be absolutely inescapable. They had woven their own noose using our company funds, and I had simply reached out and pulled the lever. I turned my attention back to the desk. The company was no longer bleeding. The employees were energized, operating without the constant suffocating fear of Marcus's explosive temper or Brenda's vindictive firing sprees. The toxic culture they had cultivated had been surgically removed. My father was safely navigating his transition into a peaceful retirement, knowing his life's work was finally secure. I had not just saved his legacy, I had forged my own future from the wreckage they left behind. The Sterling family had tried to bury me, but they had not realized I was a seed. The sharp melodic tone of the desk intercom broke through my quiet reflection. The sound signaled the official start of my new reality. I reached forward and pressed the silver button. "Yes, Sarah," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Ms. Maya, the new regional managers are here for orientation." My assistant announced, her tone bright and efficient. I released the intercom button and stood up from the desk. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored navy blazer, adjusting the cuffs with practiced precision. I took one final look out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The city below was a sprawling grid of endless opportunities and constant motion. The storm had passed, and the horizon was perfectly clear. A slow, genuine smile broke across my face. Sometimes the best way to get rid of a parasite is to let it gorge itself until it bursts. My name is Maya, and this is how I took my life back. The most powerful lesson from these stories of betrayal is that validation must always come from within, not from conditional approval. When faced with toxic family dynamics, the best revenge is building a successful independent life in absolute silence. Like Lacey, who built a tech empire while her family continually mocked her choices, prioritizing your path over their expectations brings ultimate freedom. True worth is never determined by old family hierarchies, but entirely by your own profound resilience. Please share your own story of overcoming family toxicity in the comments below.